The emergency beacon pierced through the void of space with the desperate intensity of a dying star. Ambassador Zextai of the Korthak Confederation clutched the transmission device with trembling claws, her usually pristine blue scales now dull with exhaustion and fear. Around her, the command center of the diplomatic vessel Harmonious Dawn flickered with failing systems as another impact shook the hull. "Status report," she demanded, though her voice cracked with the weight of impending doom. Communications Officer Velran looked up from his console, his 4 eyes wide with terror. "The Shadowmaw fleet has us completely surrounded, Ambassador. 17 heavy cruisers and, at least 40 smaller vessels. Our escorts were destroyed in the first wave." Zextai's heart sank. The Shadowmaw were exactly what their name suggested, a species that consumed civilizations like a plague of locusts. They had already devoured 3 systems in the Outer Rim, leaving nothing but empty worlds stripped of all life. Intelligence reports suggested they were moving toward the core systems next, which meant every major civilization was at risk. "How long until our shields fail?" she asked. 12 minutes, maybe less," reported the ship's engineer, his voice barely above a whisper. The Korthak Confederation had been the galaxy's peacekeeping force for over 2,000 years. Their diplomatic vessels carried the hopes and treaties of hundreds of worlds. But, against the Shadowmaw, even their most advanced technology felt like throwing pebbles at a hurricane. Zextai stared at the tactical display showing the enemy ships closing in like hungry predators. Each Shadowmaw vessel was massive, their dark hulls seeming to absorb light itself. They moved with terrifying coordination, their weapons systematically dismantling the Harmonious Dawn's defenses piece by piece. "Ambassador," Velran called out, his voice cutting through her despair. "I'm detecting something strange in the long-range sensors." "Define strange," she replied, though she doubted anything could help them now. "There's a massive fleet approaching from the edge of the system. The signature doesn't match any known species in our database." Velran's claws danced over his controls, trying to refine the readings. "The energy signatures are primitive compared to our technology, but there are so many of them." Hope flickered in Zextai's chest, but she forced herself to remain realistic. "Could they be more Shadowmaw reinforcements?" "Negative. The hull compositions are completely different. These ships appear to be constructed primarily of refined metals rather than the bioorganic materials the Shadowmaw use." Another violent shudder ran through the ship as the Shadowmaw continued their methodical destruction. Zextai knew they had perhaps 8 minutes before their shields collapsed entirely. "Can you identify the species?" she asked desperately. Velran's expression grew confused. "According to our galactic database, the energy signatures match a species called humans from a planet designated as Terra, Sol System." "But, Ambassador, that's impossible." "Why is it impossible?" "Because humans are classified as a pre-spaceflight species. Our last survey listed them as barely having achieved basic orbital flight. They shouldn't even have faster-than-light capability." Zextai felt her world tilt. The Galactic Survey had been conducted only 50 of their years ago, which was barely a moment in galactic terms. Most species took thousands of years to develop from basic spaceflight to interstellar capability. "How many ships are we detecting?" she asked. Velran's voice was stunned. "Over 3,000 vessels, Ambassador. And more are arriving every few seconds." The main view screen flickered to life, showing the approaching fleet. Zextai gasped at what she saw. The human ships were unlike anything in her experience. Where most civilized species built elegant, streamlined vessels that moved gracefully through space, these human ships looked like they had been designed for war. They were angular, aggressive, bristling with weapon emplacements and armor plating. Some were massive dreadnoughts that dwarfed even the largest Shadowmaw vessels, while others were sleek destroyers that moved with predatory grace. The entire fleet radiated an aura of barely contained violence that made Zextai's survival instincts scream warnings. "Ambassador," her tactical officer called out, "the Shadowmaw have noticed the approaching fleet. They're pulling back from their attack on us." On the display, Zextai watched in amazement as the Shadowmaw fleet, which had been pressing their attack with relentless determination, began to reorganize into defensive formations. The predators had suddenly realized they might have become prey. "Are we receiving any communications from the human fleet?" she asked. "Yes, Ambassador. They're broadcasting on multiple frequencies. The message is repeating in several languages, including Basic Galactic Standard." "Put it through." The bridge speakers crackled to life, and a voice unlike any Zextai had ever heard filled the command center. It was deep, authoritative, and carried an undertone of controlled aggression that sent shivers down her spine. "This is Admiral Sarachin of the Terran Defense Fleet, commanding the 1st Expeditionary Force. We received a distress beacon from Korthak Confederation vessel Harmonious Dawn. Be advised, we are moving to intercept hostile forces in your vicinity. Please maintain your current position and prepare to receive assistance." Velran looked up from his console with wide eyes. "Ambassador, how did they receive our distress beacon?" "We only broadcast it on emergency frequencies that should only reach Confederation vessels." Zextai stared at the advancing human fleet, her mind racing. The distress beacon had been programmed with automatic translation protocols and basic galactic positioning data, but it was supposed to be encrypted for Confederation forces only. Either these humans had broken their encryption in minutes, or they had technology far beyond what the galactic survey had indicated. "Admiral Chen," she responded, activating the communications system. "This is Ambassador Zextai of the Korthak Confederation. We are under attack by a hostile species known as the Shadowmaw. They have already destroyed 3 star systems and pose a significant threat to galactic stability." There was a brief pause before the human admiral responded. "Understood, Ambassador. We're familiar with the Shadowmaw from our intelligence reports. All civilian and diplomatic vessels are advised to maintain minimum safe distance. We're about to engage hostile forces." "Admiral, I must warn you," Zextai said urgently. "The Shadowmaw fleet consists of 17 heavy cruisers and 40 support vessels. They possess advanced bioorganic technology and have never been defeated in direct combat. Perhaps it would be wiser to coordinate with Confederation military forces." Admiral Chen's response was swift and carried a note of what Zextai could only describe as grim satisfaction. "Ambassador, we appreciate the intel. However, you called for help, and the cavalry has arrived. Please stand by." The human fleet had spread out into what appeared to be a standard attack formation, but Zextai noticed something odd. Instead of the careful, methodical approach most civilized species used in space combat, the humans were accelerating directly toward the Shadowmaw fleet at what seemed like reckless speed. "Tactical analysis of human fleet composition," she ordered. Her tactical officer worked frantically at his console. "Ambassador, I'm reading weapon signatures unlike anything in our database. The energy outputs are concerning. Some of these ships appear to be carrying weapons with destructive potential exceeding our heaviest battlecruisers. How is that possible if they're a pre-spaceflight species?" "I don't know, Ambassador. But the energy readings don't lie." On the main screen, the human fleet continued its aggressive approach toward the Shadowmaw formation. The enemy ships had arranged themselves in a classic defensive pattern, their bioorganic hulls pulsing with dark energy as they prepared for battle. Zextai watched in fascination as the human fleet suddenly split into multiple attack groups. Some ships peeled off to engage the Shadowmaw flanks, while others maintained direct approach vectors toward the enemy center. It was a complex maneuver that required precise coordination and split-second timing. "The humans are beginning their attack run," reported her tactical officer. "Shadowmaw vessels are powering weapons and preparing to fire." "Record everything," Zextai ordered. "The Confederation needs to analyze this encounter thoroughly." The first exchange of weapons fire lit up space like a miniature star being born. The Shadowmaw opened fire with their characteristic dark energy beams, weapons that had carved through Confederation shields like they were made of paper. But, instead of the devastating impact everyone expected, something unprecedented happened. The human ships didn't even try to avoid the incoming fire. Instead, they flew directly through it, their hulls sparking and smoking but continuing their attack runs without pause. Return fire from the human fleet was immediate and overwhelming. Where Shadowmaw weapons were elegant spears of dark energy, human weapons were crude hammers of destruction. Streams of projectiles, energy beams, and things that defied easy classification poured from the human ships like a metallic storm. The effect was immediate and shocking. The first Shadowmaw vessel to take direct hits from the human attack simply broke apart. Not the clean destruction that most weapons caused, but a violent dismantling that sent debris spinning in all directions. The bioorganic hull that had shrugged off Confederation weapons seemed to have no defense against whatever the humans were firing. "By the void," whispered the tactical officer. "They're cutting through Shadowmaw armor like it's not even there." Zextai could only stare in amazement as the human fleet tore into the enemy formation with ruthless efficiency. These weren't the careful, measured attacks of a civilized military force. This was controlled violence on a scale she had never imagined possible. The Shadowmaw, who had terrorized the galaxy for years, were being systematically destroyed by a species that shouldn't even have been capable of leaving their home star system. Ambassador, Velron called out, his voice shaky with disbelief. I'm detecting even more human ships arriving. The fleet size has increased to over 5,000 vessels. Zextai's mind struggled to process what she was witnessing. Not only had humans somehow developed faster than light travel in an impossibly short time, but they had built a military force that dwarfed anything the galaxy had ever seen. And they had arrived within hours of receiving a distress call from a species they had never officially contacted. How did they mobilize such a massive fleet so quickly, she wondered aloud. Her question was answered when Admiral Chen's voice came through the speakers again. Ambassador Zextai, be advised that additional Terran Defense Force units are arriving to secure the area. We're also detecting more Shadowmaw vessels approaching from multiple vectors. It appears this was just their advance guard. Admiral, how many ships are you prepared to commit to this engagement? There was a pause before Admiral Chen responded, and, when she did, her voice carried a note of something that sounded almost like anticipation. All of them, Ambassador. Humanity doesn't do anything halfway. As if to emphasize her point, space around the system began to fill with new arrivals. Human ships of every size and configuration materialized from hyperspace jumps, their engines leaving trails of light as they moved to join the battle. Zextai watched the tactical display in growing amazement as the human fleet swelled to numbers that shouldn't have been possible. How many ships do they have? She asked her tactical officer. I've stopped counting at 10,000, Ambassador. And they're still arriving. The battle had shifted from a desperate last stand to something else entirely. The Shadowmaw fleet, which had seemed overwhelming minutes before, now looked pitifully small compared to the human armada that surrounded them. But, instead of the mass slaughter Zextai expected, she noticed something interesting in the human attack patterns. They were being methodical, almost surgical. Human ships worked in coordinated groups, isolating individual Shadowmaw vessels and destroying them with concentrated firepower. It wasn't the chaotic free-for-all she had expected from such an aggressive-looking fleet. The humans fight like they've been doing this for centuries, observed her tactical officer. But, according to our records, they've never encountered another spacefaring species. Zextai nodded, her mind racing with implications. Everything about this encounter challenged what she thought she knew about galactic civilization. How had humanity developed such advanced technology so quickly? How had they built such a massive fleet? And, most importantly, how had they known to come here? The answer to that last question came when Admiral Chun contacted them again. Ambassador Zextai, we need to discuss the situation. Are you able to receive a diplomatic party aboard your vessel? Of course, Admiral. But, our docking systems may not be compatible with your technology. That won't be a problem. We've analyzed your ship's specifications from your distress beacon data. Our engineers have already adapted our shuttle systems for compatibility. Zextai felt another chill run down her spine. The distress beacon contained encrypted technical specifications that would take most species weeks to decode and analyze. The humans had done it in minutes while simultaneously engaging in a major space battle. Very well, Admiral. We'll prepare to receive your representative. Thank you, Ambassador. Fair warning though, we've got a lot to discuss, and some of it might be difficult to believe. As Zextai watched the human fleet continue its devastating assault on the Shadowmaw forces, she reflected on Admiral Chen's warning. After what she had witnessed in the last hour, she was beginning to think that very little about humanity would be easy to believe. The galaxy was about to discover that its latest member species was unlike anything they had ever encountered. The human shuttle that docked with the Harmonious Dawn looked nothing like the sleek diplomatic transports Zextai was accustomed to. It was compact, angular, and covered in what appeared to be additional armor plating. When the airlock cycled open, she found herself face to face with her first human. Admiral Sarah Chen was shorter than Zextai had expected, but there was an intensity to her presence that filled the corridor. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical style, and her uniform was crisp despite having just commanded a massive space battle. What struck Zextai most were the Admiral's eyes. They held a depth of experience that seemed impossible for someone from a species so young. Ambassador Zextai, Admiral Chen said, offering what Zextai recognized as a human gesture of greeting. Thank you for receiving us. I'm Admiral Chen, and this is my diplomatic aide, Commander Williams. The second human was taller, with lighter skin and an expression of barely contained curiosity. Both humans moved with a fluid grace that suggested extensive military training, but there was something else in their bearing, a confidence that bordered on arrogance. Admiral Chen, I must express my gratitude for your intervention, Zextai said as she led them toward the conference room. Without your fleet's arrival, my ship and crew would have been lost. Just doing our job, Ambassador. Though I suspect you have some questions about how we knew to come here. That was an understatement. Zextai had dozens of questions, but she decided to start with the most pressing one. Admiral, our records indicate that humanity achieved basic orbital flight only 50 years ago. How is it possible that you now command such an advanced fleet? Admiral Chen exchanged a glance with Commander Williams before answering. Ambassador, your galactic survey data was accurate at the time it was collected. However, humanity has a tendency to accelerate our development when we're properly motivated. They entered the conference room, and Zextai gestured for her guests to take seats around the circular table. The chamber's large viewport showed the ongoing battle outside, though it was clear the outcome was no longer in doubt. Human ships had surrounded the remaining Shadowmaw vessels and were systematically eliminating them with frightening efficiency. 50 years is an impossibly short time for such technological advancement, Zextai insisted. Most species require thousands of years to develop faster than light travel. Most species don't have the same incentives that humanity had, Commander Williams replied. We learned about the existence of other spacefaring civilizations about 30 years ago. How? Zextai asked. Our protocols specifically prohibit contact with pre-spaceflight species. Admiral Chen's expression grew serious. Your protocols are admirable, Ambassador. Unfortunately, not all species follow them. We had a rather unpleasant first contact experience with a group called the Hegemony Raiders. The name sent a chill through Zextai's body. The Hegemony Raiders were slavers who operated outside galactic law, preying on primitive worlds for resources and labor. They had been a persistent problem for the Confederation, but their hit-and-run tactics made them difficult to eliminate. The Raiders made contact with Earth, she asked. Contact is putting it mildly, Admiral Chen replied grimly. They attempted to establish what they called a harvesting operation. They set up mining facilities in our outer system and began abducting humans for slave labor. They also made it very clear that they considered our entire species to be their property. Commander Williams leaned forward. The Raiders made one critical error in their assessment of humanity. They assumed that because we were primitive, we would be passive. They were very wrong. What happened? Zextai asked, though she was beginning to suspect the answer. We went to war, Admiral Chen said simply. Not the kind of careful, limited conflict that most civilized species engage in. Total war. Every human nation put aside their differences and focused on a single goal, the complete elimination of the Hegemony Raiders. Zextai tried to process this information. The Hegemony Raiders had ships, advanced weapons, and the experience of having conquered dozens of worlds. A pre-spaceflight species should have been helpless against them. How did you fight them without space-capable vessels? We built them, Commander Williams replied. In 2 years, humanity converted our entire global economy into a war machine focused on space combat. We strip-mined 3 asteroids, built orbital shipyards, and reverse-engineered every piece of Raider technology we could capture. That's impossible. The technological gaps alone. Ambassador, Admiral Chen interrupted gently, you're thinking like a civilized species. Humans don't have the luxury of thinking that way. When someone threatens our survival, we don't calculate odds or consider diplomatic solutions first. We adapt, we overcome, and we make sure the threat never returns. Outside the viewport, Zextai watched a group of human destroyers finish off the last Shadowmaw cruiser. The enemy vessel broke apart under concentrated fire, its bioorganic hull simply disintegrating under the barrage. The Raiders learned this lesson the hard way, Admiral Chen continued. What they thought would be a simple harvesting operation turned into a nightmare that lasted 3 years. By the end, we had tracked down every Raider vessel, every base, every hidden outpost. We didn't just defeat them, we erased them completely. You eliminated an entire organization in 3 years? Zextai asked incredulously. We eliminated an entire species in 3 years, Commander Williams corrected coldly. The hegemony raiders no longer exist. Anywhere. The casual way he stated this fact sent a deeper chill through Zextai's body. She was beginning to understand that humanity's approach to warfare was fundamentally different from anything the galaxy had seen. After we finished with the raiders, we had access to their navigation data, Admiral Chen explained. We learned about the galactic community, about species like yours, about the Confederation. We also learned about threats like the Shadowmaw. So you've been watching us? Learning about you, Admiral Chen corrected. We've spent the last 27 years studying galactic civilization, understanding the political structures, the trade routes, the various threats and alliances. We've been preparing. Preparing for what? Admiral Chen gestured toward the viewport where the human fleet was regrouping after their victory. For this. We knew that sooner or later, the galaxy would face a threat that the current power structures couldn't handle. When we received your distress call, we recognized it as that moment. Zextai felt overwhelmed by the implications. You've been building this fleet for 27 years? This fleet is just one of 12, Commander Williams said matter-of-factly. Each one is positioned to respond to threats in different sectors of the galaxy. What you see here represents about 8% of our total military capability. The numbers made Zextai's head spin. If this massive armada was only a fraction of humanity's military power, then, they had built a war machine that dwarfed anything the galaxy had ever seen. Why haven't you made formal contact with the Confederation? She asked. Because we needed to understand what we were dealing with first, Admiral Chen replied. No offense, Ambassador, but the galactic community's response to threats like the Shadowmaw has been inadequate. It was a fair criticism, though it stung to hear it. The Confederation had been trying to find a diplomatic solution to the Shadowmaw problem for years while entire worlds burned. The Shadowmaw cannot be reasoned with, Zextai admitted. They consume everything in their path. We know. That's why we've spent the last 5 years tracking their movements and preparing countermeasures. Today's engagement wasn't random, we've been waiting for the right opportunity to test our capabilities against them. Test? Zextai looked out at the debris field that had once been a Shadowmaw fleet. This was a test? Phase 1, Admiral Chen confirmed. We needed to understand their tactics, their weapons, their weaknesses. Now we can move to Phase 2. Commander Williams activated a holographic display that showed a 3-dimensional map of the galaxy. Red markers indicated Shadowmaw-controlled systems, while blue markers showed their projected expansion routes. Our intelligence indicates that the Shadowmaw main fleet is preparing for a major offensive, he explained. They're massing forces in the Kepler sector for an assault on the core worlds. Conservative estimates suggest they'll have over 2,000 ships when they attack. Zextai stared at the display in horror. 2,000 Shadowmaw vessels would be enough to overwhelm any defense the Confederation could mount. When will they attack? She asked. Based on their resource consumption patterns and fleet movements, approximately 6 weeks, Admiral Chen replied. Which gives us just enough time to prepare a proper welcome for them. Admiral, even with your impressive fleet, 2,000 Shadowmaw ships would be a formidable opponent. Admiral Chen smiled for the first time since boarding the ship, and the expression was distinctly predatory. Ambassador, you're still thinking too small. When the Shadowmaw arrive at the core worlds, they won't be facing one fleet. They'll be facing all 12. The holographic display zoomed out to show the entire galaxy, and Zextai gasped as blue markers appeared throughout known space. Human fleets were positioned at strategic points throughout the galaxy, each one apparently the size of the armada she had just witnessed. How many ships do you have? She whispered. Enough, Admiral Chen replied simply. But, more importantly, we have something the Shadowmaw don't expect, the element of surprise. As far as they know, humanity doesn't exist. They've never encountered our weapons, our tactics, or our level of commitment. Commander Williams manipulated the display to show detailed battle projections. The Shadowmaw strategy relies on overwhelming individual systems before defenders can coordinate a response. They've never faced an opponent prepared to engage them across multiple fronts simultaneously. You're planning to attack all of their positions at once? We're planning to end the Shadowmaw threat permanently, Admiral Chen said. Just like we did with the raiders. No negotiation, no compromise, no half measures. Complete elimination. The cold certainty in her voice made Zextai realize that she was witnessing something unprecedented in galactic history. Most civilized species approached conflict with the goal of reaching an acceptable resolution. Humanity apparently approached conflict with the goal of ensuring it never happened again. Ambassador, Admiral Chen continued, we're going to need the Confederation's help with something. Of course. What do you need? We need you to not interfere. Zextai blinked in confusion. I'm sorry? When we move against the Shadow Maw, it's going to be fast and it's going to be comprehensive. We can't have Confederation forces getting in our way or trying to establish safe zones for enemy ships. This isn't going to be the kind of conflict your people are used to. What kind of conflict will it be? Admiral Chen's expression grew distant, and, when she spoke, her voice carried the weight of someone who had seen the cost of hesitation. The kind where we make sure our children never have to worry about the Shadow Maw again. A communication alert chimed, and Commander Williams checked his display. Admiral, all sector fleets report ready status. The Shadow Maw reinforcements have been eliminated, and we're ready to proceed to Phase 2. Very good. Admiral Chen stood, and Zextai rose with her. Ambassador, I need to ask you to carry a message to the Confederation leadership. What message? Tell them that humanity is formally announcing our presence in galactic affairs. Tell them that we're prepared to take responsibility for threats that the current power structures can't handle. And, tell them that we're going to end the Shadow Maw problem once and for all. As they walked back toward the airlock, Zextai found herself struggling with the implications of everything she had learned. Humanity had emerged onto the galactic stage not as supplicants seeking membership in civilized society, but as a military power that made every existing fleet look like a patrol boat. Admiral, what happens after you eliminate the Shadow Maw? She asked. We go back to watching and waiting, Admiral Chen replied. Humanity doesn't want to rule the galaxy, Ambassador. We just want to make sure it's safe for everyone who lives in it. At the airlock, Admiral Chen turned back one final time. There's one more thing you should know. The distress beacon you sent wasn't just received by us. We've been monitoring all emergency frequencies for years. Every time a civilian ship calls for help and no one answers, we take note. Every time a colony gets overrun because help arrived too late, we remember. Why? Because someone needs to, Admiral Chen said simply. The galaxy is a dangerous place, and the current system isn't adequate to protect the people who live in it. Until something better comes along, humanity is prepared to fill that gap. As the human shuttle departed, Zextai watched it rejoin the massive fleet that was already beginning to disperse to new positions. In the space of a few hours, everything she thought she knew about galactic civilization had been turned upside down. Humanity hadn't asked permission to join the galactic community. They had simply announced their presence by solving a problem that had been plaguing civilized space for years. And they had made it clear that this was just the beginning. The galaxy was about to discover that its newest members played by different rules entirely. The Galactic Council chambers had never seen an emergency session quite like this one. Representatives from 47 major civilizations filled the massive circular amphitheater, their varied forms creating a cacophony of worried sounds as they processed Ambassador Zextai's report. Above them, holographic displays showed the aftermath of the Shadow Maw fleet's destruction, a debris field where 17 heavy cruisers had been completely obliterated. High Counselor Thranks of the Valdorian Empire raised his crystalline hand for silence. His species had held positions of leadership for over 3 millennia, and his experience showed in the careful way he modulated his synthesized voice. Ambassador Zextai, you're asking us to believe that a previously unknown species appeared from nowhere, destroyed an entire Shadow Maw fleet, and, then, claimed they'd been watching us for decades without our knowledge. That is correct, High Counselor, Zextai replied, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was reporting. The human fleet numbered over 10,000 vessels, and Admiral Chen indicated this represented only a fraction of their total military capability. Murmurs of disbelief rippled through the chamber. Ambassador Korvac of the Hegemony Trade Consortium slammed his massive fist on his speaking podium, his ursine features twisted with incredulity. This is preposterous. No species develops from pre-spaceflight to that level of military capability in 50 years. It's physically impossible. The evidence suggests otherwise, interjected Dr. Yellen of the Scientific Advisory Board. The elderly Nexarian's feathered crest was raised in excitement rather than alarm. I've analyzed the sensor data from the Harmonious Dawn. The human weapon signatures are unlike anything in our database, but they're devastatingly effective against Shadowmaw bioorganic armor. High Counselor Thranks manipulated the central hologram to show the tactical analysis. What kind of weapons are we looking at, Doctor? A combination of technologies that shouldn't work together, Dr. Yellen replied, her enthusiasm evident. They appear to use kinetic projectiles accelerated to incredible velocities, combined with directed energy weapons and what can only be described as controlled nuclear detonations. It's crude compared to our technology, but the raw destructive power is staggering. Crude but effective, observed General Croth of the Confederation Defense Forces. The scarred veteran's cybernetic eye gleamed as he studied the tactical data. Their attack patterns show sophisticated coordination and tactical doctrine. These aren't primitives who stumbled onto advanced technology, they're experienced warriors. Ambassador Zextai nodded. Admiral Chen made it clear that humanity has been at war before. They eliminated something called the Hegemony Raiders. The chamber fell silent. Most representatives knew about the Hegemony Raiders. They had been a persistent threat for decades before mysteriously disappearing about 25 years ago. The assumption had been that they had moved to a different sector or been destroyed by infighting. They eliminated the entire Raider organization, asked Ambassador Selvek of the Outer Colonies Coalition. Admiral Chen specifically stated they eliminated the entire species, Zextai clarified. In 3 years. The implications of that statement settled over the chamber like a cold shroud. The Hegemony Raiders had been numerous, well-armed, and experienced in warfare. For a pre-spaceflight species to not just defeat them but exterminate them entirely suggested a level of ruthlessness that most civilized species couldn't comprehend. What do these humans want from us? Asked Counselor Mirren of the Peaceful Worlds Alliance. Her species prized harmony above all else, and the mere discussion of such violence clearly disturbed her. According to Admiral Chen, they want us to stay out of their way while they eliminate the Shadowmaw threat, Zextai replied. And, if we refuse? General Croth asked bluntly. Zextai considered the question carefully. The Admiral was polite but firm. I got the impression that our cooperation would be appreciated but isn't required. High Counselor Thranks activated additional displays showing current Shadowmaw positions throughout the galaxy. The red markers painted a grim picture of the threat they all faced. Our intelligence suggests the Shadowmaw are massing for a major offensive against the core worlds, he announced. Conservative estimates put their fleet strength at over 2,000 vessels. Even with our combined forces, we couldn't mount an effective defense against such numbers. Which is exactly what Admiral Chen told me, Zextai added. She indicated that humanity has been tracking Shadowmaw movements and is prepared to engage them across multiple fronts simultaneously. Dr. Yellen's feathers rustled with excitement. The strategic implications are fascinating. If humanity has 12 fleets of the size Ambassador Zextai witnessed, they could engage the Shadowmaw everywhere at once. It would be the first time anyone has attempted such a comprehensive military operation. It would also be the most violent conflict the galaxy has seen in recorded history, General Croth observed grimly. These humans don't appear to believe in limited warfare or negotiated settlements. Ambassador Korvac of the Trade Consortium leaned forward. What about our existing treaties and trade agreements? If humanity is claiming some kind of protective authority over the galaxy, how does that affect established commercial relationships? Admiral Chen specifically stated that humanity doesn't want to rule the galaxy, Zextai replied. They appear to be focused solely on security threats. For now, Korvac growled. Military powers rarely remain content with their initial spheres of influence. High Counselor Thranks called for order as debates began breaking out across the chamber. We need to focus on the immediate situation. The Shadowmaw threat is real and imminent. If this human fleet is capable of addressing it, do we have the right to interfere? Do we have the right not to, countered Counselor Mirren? If we allow an unknown military force to conduct operations throughout the galaxy without oversight, what precedent does that set? The debate was interrupted by an urgent communication from the Chamber's communications officer. High Counselor, we're receiving a priority transmission from the Sol System. The sender identifies himself as Secretary General Harrison of the United Earth Government. A hush fell over the chamber. Zextai felt her heart's race. This was humanity's first direct contact with the Galactic Council. Put it through, High Counselor Thranks ordered. The central hologram shimmered and resolved into the image of a human male who appeared to be in his 60s. He had gray hair, intelligent eyes, and wore what seemed to be formal diplomatic attire. Despite the technology gap, the transmission quality was perfect. Honored members of the Galactic Council, Secretary General Harrison began, his voice carrying easily through the chamber's translation systems. I am James Harrison, Secretary General of the United Earth Government. I address you today to formally announce humanity's presence in galactic affairs and to discuss our mutual security concerns. High Counselor Thranks activated the response system. Secretary General Harrison, this is High Counselor Thranks of the Valdorian Empire, current chair of the Galactic Council. We have received reports of your fleet's intervention against Shadowmaw forces. We would appreciate clarification of your intentions. Our intentions are straightforward, High Counselor, Harrison replied. For the past 27 years, humanity has observed the galaxy's struggle with various security threats. We've watched civilizations fall, colonies burn, and innocent people suffer while the current system proves inadequate to protect them. We've decided that this situation is unacceptable. You speak of inadequacy, Ambassador Korvac interjected angrily. The galactic community has maintained peace for thousands of years. Secretary General Harrison's expression didn't change, but his next words carried quiet authority. Ambassador Korvac, in the past 50 years alone, 17 civilizations have been partially or completely destroyed by various threats. Over 2 billion sentient beings have died in conflicts that could have been prevented with decisive action. If you call that peace, then humanity and the galactic community have very different definitions of the word. The accuracy of his figures was unsettling. Most representatives preferred not to focus on the casualties that occurred outside the major trade routes and diplomatic centers. What gives humanity the right to make these decisions unilaterally, demanded General Croft. The same thing that gives the Galactic Council the right to make decisions for species that aren't represented here, Harrison replied smoothly. The ability to act and the will to accept responsibility for the consequences. Dr. Yellen spoke up with scientific curiosity. Secretary General Harrison, our records indicate that humanity achieved spaceflight only 50 years ago. How did you develop such advanced military capabilities so quickly? Harrison's expression grew colder. Doctor, when someone attacks your home, destroys your cities, and enslaves your people, you learn to adapt quickly or you die. The hegemony raiders provided humanity with excellent motivation to accelerate our development. Our intelligence indicates the raiders disappeared 25 years ago, High Counselor Thranks noted carefully. They didn't disappear, Harrison corrected. We eliminated them. Completely. It took 3 years of total war, but we made sure they would never threaten anyone again. The galaxy is safer because the raiders no longer exist. The casual way he discussed genocide sent uncomfortable ripples through the chamber. Most civilized species hadn't engaged in wars of extermination for millennia. Secretary General, Counselor Mirren asked nervously, how can we be certain that humanity won't turn these weapons against peaceful civilizations? Because we've had the capability to do so for 25 years and haven't, Harrison replied matter-of-factly. Humanity isn't interested in conquest or domination. We're interested in stability and security. The galaxy is our neighborhood, and we intend to keep it safe. And if the Galactic Council orders you to withdraw your fleets? General Croft challenged. Secretary General Harrison was quiet for a long moment before responding. General, with respect, the Galactic Council has no enforcement mechanism that could make such an order meaningful. Your combined fleets number perhaps 3,000 vessels total. Our current military strength exceeds 50,000 ships, with production capabilities that could triple that number within 2 years if necessary. The number hit the chamber like a physical blow. 50,000 ships represented more military power than the rest of the galaxy combined. However, Harrison continued, we have no desire for conflict with the galactic community. We're prepared to work within existing frameworks wherever possible. We simply refuse to allow those frameworks to prevent us from protecting innocent lives. High Counselor Thranks struggled to maintain diplomatic composure. What exactly are you proposing, Secretary General? We propose to eliminate the Shadowmaw threat permanently within the next 6 weeks, Harrison stated. We will coordinate with Confederation forces to minimize civilian casualties and protect non-combatant vessels. After the Shadowmaw are eliminated, we will withdraw our fleets to patrol positions and resume monitoring status. And if other threats emerge? We will address them as necessary, Harrison replied simply. Humanity has appointed itself as the galaxy's security guarantor. We take that responsibility seriously. Ambassador Zextai found herself speaking before she consciously decided to. Secretary General Harrison, Admiral Chen mentioned that you've been monitoring emergency frequencies. How often do you respond to distress calls? Harrison's expression softened slightly. More often than you might think, Ambassador. In the past year alone, our rapid response fleets have assisted with evacuation operations, pirate attacks, and natural disasters in over 300 systems. Most of the time, local authorities assumed the assistance came from neighboring systems or private security forces. The revelation that humanity had been quietly helping throughout the galaxy for years added another layer to an already complex situation. They weren't making a power grab, they were formalizing protection they had already been providing. The vote before this council is simple, High Counselor Thranks announced. Do we formally object to humanity's proposed action against the Shadow Maw, knowing that such objection would likely be ignored? Or do we acknowledge that the current threat exceeds our capabilities and allow these humans to address it? The debate that followed would be remembered in galactic history books for centuries. Some representatives argued for sovereignty and the rule of law. Others pointed out that sovereignty meant nothing if entire civilizations were being consumed by the Shadow Maw. When the vote was finally called, it passed by a narrow margin. The Galactic Council would not interfere with humanity's operation against the Shadow Maw. As the session adjourned, Zextai reflected on how much the galaxy had changed in a single day. Humanity had emerged not as supplicants seeking membership in galactic society, but as self-appointed guardians who had been watching from the shadows for decades. Whether this would prove to be salvation or the beginning of a new form of domination remained to be seen. But one thing was certain, the galaxy would never be the same. 6 weeks later, Admiral Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the UES Retribution, the flagship of humanity's first fleet, as they dropped out of hyperspace in the Kepler sector. Around her, the massive command vessel hummed with controlled energy as thousands of crew members prepared for what would either be the galaxy's salvation or its bloodiest day. Fleet status report, she ordered, her voice cutting through the bridge's focused activity. All 12 fleets report ready status, replied Commander Torres, her tactical officer. Total force strength, 47,000 vessels positioned across 15 star systems. Shadow Maw main fleet detected massing in the Kepler system as predicted. Chen nodded as she studied the tactical display. Intelligence had been accurate, the Shadow Maw had assembled the largest war fleet in recorded galactic history. Over 2,000 bioorganic vessels of various sizes clustered around their massive hive ships, preparing for what they clearly intended to be their final conquest of the galaxy's core worlds. Enemy fleet composition? Sensors detect 217 heavy cruisers, 463 medium cruisers, 891 light attack vessels, and 31 hive ships, reported Lieutenant Commander Park from the sensor station. Total estimated crew complement, approximately 14 million Shadow Maw. The numbers were staggering, but Chen felt no doubt about the outcome. Humanity had spent 6 weeks preparing for this moment, and every detail had been planned with the methodical precision that had become their trademark. Signal from the Galactic Observers, Communications Officer Yang announced. Confederation vessel Peaceful Unity reports they are maintaining position at minimum safe distance as requested. Chen smiled grimly. The Galactic Council had agreed to allow a small observation fleet to witness the engagement, though they had been warned to stay well clear of the combat zone. She suspected that Ambassador Zextai was aboard one of those ships, no doubt still struggling to understand what humanity was about to unleash. All fleets, this is Admiral Chen, she broadcast on the command frequency. Execute Operation Cleansing Fire. Remember, we end this today so our children never have to worry about these monsters. Show them why you don't threaten humanity's neighborhood. Across 15 star systems, the coordinated assault began immediately. Humanity's approach to warfare was unlike anything the galaxy had seen, where other species engaged in careful, measured conflicts with clear objectives and exit strategies. Humans fought with the single-minded determination of a species that understood extinction was always one defeat away. The first fleet emerged from hyperspace directly above the Shadow Maw formation, their arrival time to coincide with similar attacks throughout Shadow Maw space. Chen watched with satisfaction as her ships moved into attack formation with the precision of a machine designed for one purpose: the complete elimination of threats to human civilization. Enemy fleet is responding, Commander Torres reported. Shadow Maw vessels are moving to engage. They appear confused by our attack vector. That confusion was understandable. Most galactic species engaged in space combat at extreme ranges, using careful maneuvers and energy weapons to gradually wear down enemy defenses. Humanity had studied those tactics extensively and concluded they were inadequate for dealing with existential threats. All ships, execute close assault protocol, Chen ordered. Maximum acceleration, all weapons free. Remember, we don't take prisoners today. The human fleet surged forward like a tide of metal and fury. Where Shadow Maw vessels moved with organic grace, human ships attacked in precise formations that maximized their overwhelming firepower advantage. The first exchange of weapons fire lit up space like a miniature star being born. Shadow Maw dark energy beams lanced out to meet the approaching human fleet, but the aliens quickly discovered that their weapons, so effective against traditional galactic navies, were inadequate against human ships designed to survive in hostile environments. Human vessels didn't dodge or weave to avoid incoming fire, they flew through it, their armor plating sparking and smoking, but their weapons never ceasing their devastating return fire. First wave impact on target, reported Commander Torres. Enemy formation is breaking apart under concentrated fire. Chen watched the tactical display as human weapon systems tore through Shadow Maw defenses with brutal efficiency. Kinetic projectiles accelerated to relativistic speeds punched through bioorganic armor like it was paper, while directed energy weapons boiled away sections of enemy hulls in seconds. But what made the assault truly devastating wasn't just the weapons, it was the tactics. Human ships worked in coordinated kill groups, isolating individual Shadow Maw vessels and destroying them with focused fire before moving to the next target. There was no hesitation, no mercy, and no quarter given. Admiral, receiving priority communication from Admiral Rodriguez, commanding 7th Fleet, Yang announced. Put her through. Admiral Rodriguez's image appeared on the main screen, her bridge visible behind her as weapons fire flashed outside the viewport. Sarah, 7th Fleet has eliminated all Shadow Maw positions in the Outer Rim sectors. Moving to support 9th Fleet in the core systems offensive. Confirmed, Maria. What's your casualty report? 17 ships damaged, none lost. Enemy resistance was lighter than expected once we broke through their initial defensive lines. Chen nodded. The pattern was repeating across all fronts. Shadow Maw forces, while numerous, couldn't adapt to humanity's aggressive tactics and overwhelming firepower. They had evolved to fight the careful, measured conflicts typical of galactic warfare. Against opponents who attack with the goal of complete annihilation, they were helpless. Admiral Chen called out Lieutenant Commander Park urgently. The Shadow Maw hive ships are activating some kind of massive energy weapon. Readings are off the scale. Chen studied the sensor data as the 31 massive hive ships began to pulse with dark energy. Each vessel was over 10 kilometers long and packed with enough firepower to level entire planets. Analysis, she asked. It appears to be a coordinated attack designed to create some kind of energy cascade, Park replied. If successful, it could destroy everything in this system, including our fleet. Chen's expression never changed. Humanity had anticipated that the Shadow Maw might have weapons of mass destruction, and they had prepared accordingly. Signal Admiral Kim, commanding the siege fleet, she ordered. Execute Bright Sun Protocol. Admiral Kim acknowledges. Siege fleet moving to firing position. On the tactical display, Chen watched as a group of massive human vessels moved into position around the Shadow Maw hive ships. These were humanity's newest weapons, ships built around single massive guns designed for one purpose, the complete destruction of heavily fortified targets. All fleets, withdraw to minimum safe distance, Chen broadcast. Siege fleet, you are authorized to fire when ready. What happened next would be debated by military historians for centuries. The human siege ships fired their primary weapons simultaneously, exotic matter projectiles that warped spacetime itself as they traveled toward their targets. When the projectiles struck the Shadow Maw hive ships, the results were catastrophic. The massive alien vessels simply ceased to exist. Not destroyed in the traditional sense, but literally deleted from reality as the exotic matter weapons tore apart the fundamental forces holding their atoms together. The energy release was so intense that it could be seen from neighboring star systems. All hive ships eliminated, Commander Torres reported with satisfaction. Remaining Shadow Maw vessels are attempting to retreat. Don't let any escape, Chen ordered coldly. We end this here and now. The pursuit that followed was methodical and thorough. Human ships tracked down fleeing Shadowmaw vessels across multiple systems, hunting them with the patience of experienced predators. There was no dramatic final battle, no last desperate stand, just the systematic elimination of every enemy ship until none remained. 6 hours after the assault began, Commander Torres made the final report. All Shadowmaw positions eliminated across all sectors. No enemy vessels detected on any sensors. The threat has been completely neutralized. Chen felt a weight lift from her shoulders that she had been carrying for years. The species that had terrorized the galaxy, that had consumed entire civilizations and seemed unstoppable, no longer existed. Humanity had proven that with sufficient determination and overwhelming force, any threat could be eliminated. Signal all fleets to begin withdrawal to patrol positions, she ordered. And send a message to the galactic observers. Tell them the galaxy is safe. Aboard the Confederation observation vessel Peaceful Unity, Ambassador Zextai watched in stunned silence as the human fleet began its withdrawal. The battle she had just witnessed challenged everything she thought she knew about warfare, about civilization, and about the balance of power in the galaxy. Incredible, whispered Dr. Yellen, who had insisted on observing the engagement personally. They eliminated a threat that had plagued the galaxy for years in less than 6 hours. Eliminated everything, General Croth corrected grimly. I'm not detecting any Shadowmaw life signs anywhere in the sector. They didn't just defeat them, they erased them from existence. Zextai received a priority communication from Admiral Chen's flagship. When the human admiral's image appeared on her screen, she looked exactly as composed as she had weeks earlier. Ambassador Zextai, Admiral Chen here. The Shadowmaw threat has been permanently eliminated. Civilian traffic can resume normal operations throughout the affected sectors. Admiral, the efficiency of your operation was remarkable, Zextai replied carefully. The galaxy owes humanity a great debt. No debt necessary, Ambassador. We were just doing our job. Though I do have a message for the Galactic Council. Of course. Admiral Chan's expression grew serious. Tell them that this is what happens when someone threatens the innocent people of this galaxy. Tell them that humanity is always watching, and we remember everything. And tell them that while we prefer to remain in the background, we will not hesitate to act when the situation demands it. I will convey your message, Admiral. Thank you. Oh, and, Ambassador? The next time someone sends a distress call in this galaxy, they can be certain that someone is listening. As the human fleet disappeared into hyperspace, Zextai reflected on the galaxy's new reality. Humanity had announced their presence not with diplomacy or trade negotiations, but by solving the greatest military threat the galaxy had faced in centuries. They had proven that sometimes, the most civilized thing a civilization could do was be prepared for uncivilized warfare. The galaxy was safer because humanity was willing to shoulder the burden of its protection. But, perhaps most importantly, they had shown that when innocent people called for help, someone would always answer. The age of humanity had begun, and the galaxy would never again face its darkest threats alone. In the weeks that followed, human fleets quietly returned to their patrol positions throughout the galaxy, watching and waiting. They had made their statement clearly: the strong would no longer be allowed to prey upon the weak, and those who threatened peaceful civilizations would face the full wrath of humanity. The galaxy had new guardians, and they played by rules that ensured peace through strength and protection through the promise of overwhelming retaliation. It was a harsh system, but it worked. For the first time in centuries, the galaxy was truly safe.